introduction about Prabhu. So Chaitanya Charan Prabhu is a monk, celibate monk, right from childhood. He had a desire to offer his life for service for humanity. So after he graduated from engineering college, even though he had a big offer for master's job, he let go and he joined the full time. So ever since he studies scriptures, not only Vedic scriptures, he's well versed in most of the scriptures in the world. He knows about many religions, many topics. He's actually master of the words. His favorite part is memorizing the dictionary. His English is so profound. His language is so controlled. He uses the words. So he uses the words in such a way that he can serve in the service of Krishna. He's the author of 25 books. He wrote some of them we have here today, and then it's for sale. That we will talk about that after the class. And then he also have 2 websites, Gita Daily, where every day he writes reflections. And he's doing for many years. How many years? Almost 12 years. Every day he writes. A lot of people in the world, if anybody can subscribe, they also get to read. And also he has other websites, thespiritualscientist.com. Very profound, sublime, scientific way of explaining the Vedic literature. So many people get connected. So you all can take advantage of that. On top of that, we also have question answers. It's been answered more than 4,000 question answers. They are also available in the pen drive. If you want, I always keep in my car question answers. So almost most of them Prabhu. So that's about Prabhu. And also on top of that, he is also advisor for Sastric advisory committee for ISKCON. Any Sastric questions, the people go to him. So very profound, sublime and scientific way, and practical way, he will address. On top of that, is a wonderful human being, and he loves to talk to devotees. He allows himself available. If anybody wants to talk to him, he's available. If you didn't get an opportunity this time, please let us know. We will put in a schedule. He would like to talk, and he inspires so many people around the world. He travels. This is the 4th month, I guess. This year he's been traveling UK, Australia, Canada, and US. And he has some more places to go. So we are very fortunate to have him here. And then tomorrow he's giving the Sunday class at 11:30 in the temple. After that he's going to Pittsburgh. So today is part 2. Karna Karma. Why do bad people do good people do the bad things? So this is part 2. So I'm sure Prabhu will summarize those who have a couple of points for day 1, day 2 today, and the day 3 tomorrow. Let's give a big round of applause to Prabhu. And then there's some space I see. If we can move forward, those who come later, they can sit behind. Please. Prabhu, come forward, somebody can sit.
I'll explain this verse and we'll discuss based on it. This is 4:17, so I'm taking 3 verses from the Bhagavad Gita. Yesterday it was 4:16 and tomorrow we'll discuss 4:18. So, karmano is karma. Here api bodhavyam. So buddhi means intelligence. Bodhavyam means to intelligently understand. To use our intelligence to understand. Karmano yapi bodhavyam. Bodhavyam. Also understand your vikarmana. What is bad karma? What is inauspicious karma? Bodhavyam cha vikarmana. And akarmanascha. Akarma literally means an action. Here philosophically, it means action that does not produce any reaction. Akarmanascha bodhavyam. And why does one need to carefully understand all these things? Bodhavyam. We have to use the intelligence to understand it. Because Gahana. Gahana means deep, complex, intricate. You know, there is more than what meets the eye. Things are not as they appear to be. So Gahana karmano gatihi. The way karma moves is difficult to figure out. Gahana karmano gatihi. Karmano yapi bodhavyam. Bodhavyam cha vikarmanaha. Akarmanascha bodhavyam. Gahana karmano gatihi. Together. Once. Karmano yapi bodhavyam. Bodhavyam cha vikarmanaha. Karmanascha bodhavyam. Gahana karmano gatihi. So thank you everyone for coming today. And while we are doing this 3-part series, each part can be understood separately also. Still, we are broadly discussing the life of Karna and contrasting it with the life of Arjuna to understand what choices were made and how. So we discussed the similarities in their life trajectories. Both of them had disadvantaged childhoods. Karna's disadvantage was that he was born in royalty, but he was never given the credit of royalty because he was considered to be of a lesser worth. Arjuna was born in royalty, but he never got even the safety of an ordinary human being, or to speak of royalty. In the very home where he was staying, after his father had been killed, there were constant assassination attempts on him and his family. And then both of them by merit rose. Both of them used their talent and worked hard and became great archers. And both of them made decisive friendships. So for Karna, the friendship was with whom? Duryodhana. And for Arjuna, the friendship was with Krishna. And now both of them are now in a position of prosperity. Arjuna is the king of Angadesh, Karna is the king of Angadesh, and Arjuna is a part of the ruling family of the prosperous kingdom of Indraprastha. And now their paths cross in an extremely fateful way. And here, yesterday we were discussing how Karna, he was basically a good person, but the key thing that happened for him was he had a deep need for belonging. Because he was excluded, he was not given the privilege of being a part of the elite circle of royalty. He became immensely indebted to the person who gave him entry into that elite circle. And that person was Duryodhana. Now suppose there is some elite club in a particular city and we very much want to get in there. And maybe it's not just a matter of wealth or prestige, but it's an invitation only club. So the person who gives the invitation to us, we feel very indebted to that person. Karna was, till now we've seen he's a virtuous person. But when Duryodhana started coming up with schemes to try to kill the Pandavas, Karna opposed it initially. But Karna faced a choice between virtue and friendship. So his virtue told him that there's no need to hatch some schemes like this. He said, let's fight against the Kauravas. Let's defeat them in a battle fair and square, against the Pandavas. Let's defeat them in a battle fair and square. But Duryodhana would not listen to him. So here, he chose friendship over virtue. And the effect of this was catastrophic. So, in one sense, we discussed how our situations can explain our emotions, but they don't. Remember what I said yesterday? Our past, our present can explain our emotions, but it doesn't necessarily excuse our actions. Sometimes somebody yells at someone. Okay, what was going on? Why did you yell? Oh, this happened. Oh, okay, I understand why you yelled. But still, it was not the right thing to do. So there's something which is explanation, but explanation should not be an excuse. The key difference between when we are explaining or when we are excusing ourselves is the willingness to take accountability. Yeah, I shouldn't have done that. So this is a theme which I will continue tomorrow, but let's focus right now on one incident toward which everything was building up. So if we consider timeline of the Ramayana, of the Mahabharata, basically say here the Pandavas performed the Rajasuya Yajna. And before this, significantly before this, there was the Draupadi Swayamvar. Now, in these two incidents, two of the main characters in the Kaurava side felt insulted. What happened in the Rajasuya Yajna? Yeah, but who felt insulted? Duryodhan felt insulted. After that, see, we will look at both. But I'll talk about Duryodhan briefly here. Our focus is on Karna. But Duryodhan always wanted to prove himself superior to the Pandavas. And when the Rajasuya Yajna was performed, when he saw the sheer amount of gifts that they got, it was not just that they built a spectacular palace, but the sheer amount of gifts that they got. Oh, he just started burning with envy. Now, envy is actually, you could say, the evil cousin of respect. Envy is essentially respect offered unwillingly and unhappily. When we are envying someone, we are actually respecting that person. Isn't it? Oh, you are having something so good, but you having something so good does not make me happy. When you having something good makes me happy, makes me awestruck, makes me appreciative, that is respect. But the same mode is there. You have something great, and I cannot deny that it is great, but I don't like it. So envy is respect offered unwillingly and unhappily. So in terms of intention and emotion, there is a difference. Now when this happened, it was bad enough for Duryodhana. But then when he decided to stay on, so see, for all of us, we need to know what are the vulnerabilities we have. If somebody is an alcoholic, then it is best that they do not visit a bar. If they are trying to recover from alcoholism. If they want to go on with their alcoholism, it's different. But if they want to recover or stay free from alcoholism, it's best that they don't go to a bar. If there's a party and after that there's going to be drinking, oh, let me stay on for some time. Well, you will stay on for some time in the party and you will stay on for a long time in the habit. Isn't it? So, somehow everyone went back. But Duryodhana said, I want to stay on. But there's no reason for him to stay on. Now, unfortunately, Duryodhana did not have any good advisors. Now, sometimes, in some cases, like Prabhupada would say, a bad uncle is better than no uncle. If you have no food, at least poor food is better than no food at all. But sometimes a bad advisor is worse than no advisor. So he had only bad advisors. And he stayed on, and everything that he saw over there inflamed his anger, envy. And then finally, when he mistook in the palace of illusions, he mistook the place which was wet, he thought it to be solid. And he slipped and he fell. And when he fell, Now, normally, if someone falls, in most civilized places, somebody will usually want to help them. But Duryodhan, throughout, was putting on a lot of airs. Like some people are so pompous, they are so self-important. And when somebody is very self-important, then it is a natural human tendency to want to put the person in their place. So it was not animosity, he had just been putting on so much airs. So when he slipped and fell, everybody laughed. Now that was not a malicious laugh, it was just somebody, it was humorous because, now of course you could say maybe they shouldn't have laughed. That's true. And Yudhishthir told them, stop laughing. But the point was that, it was not that the Pandavas had deliberately planned that palace of illusion so that Duryodhana would fall and they could laugh at Duryodhana. That was not the intention at all. And there is dramatization done often in a way that tries to distort or pervert the traditional narratives. So often in many popular depictions of the Mahabharata, it is said that Draupadi said, Andhe ka beta andha. The child of a blind person is blind. Now Draupadi did not say that. There are several versions of the Mahabharata originally. None of them she says that. So but still he felt incensed. So he was insulted over here. Rajya Satya Duryodhan felt insulted. And before that, Draupadi Swayamvar had happened. At that time, who had felt insulted? Karna. Now, there are multiple recensions of the Ramayana, of the Mahabharata, sorry. Now, in this part, let's try to understand what happened. All the Kshatriyas were vying for the hand of Draupadi. And they had to hit the target for that purpose. So, now when various Kshatriyas came forward and none of them could reach the target, then Karna came forward. Now, this is first and foremost a Swayamvar. Swayamvar means that it is Draupadi's right to choose. And she or her family can decide what criteria. But it is ultimately the criteria is meant as an aid for her to choose. So now if she didn't want to marry Karna, it's up to her. Now yes, you could say that he was demeaned because he was considered to be of a lower caste. Now if you consider the way the hierarchy was, Kshatriyas are second in the hierarchy. Sutas are somewhere below. Who is above in the hierarchy? Brahmanas. So now, in the Mahabharata, it is described that after all the Kshatriyas failed to hit the target, then Arjuna came forward. And Arjuna at that time was in the garb of a Brahmana. And Arjuna asked, can a Brahmana participate in this contest? Now technically the Brahmanas are above the Kshatriyas. But still this was clear that this was a contest for Kshatriyas. And Drishtadhyumna, surprised, to look at his father. His father said, yeah, the Brahmanas are always worshipable for the Kshatriyas. So he agreed. Now Karna, was he a Kshatriya, was he not a Kshatriya? Well, he was a king, so in that sense he was Kshatriya. But he knew that others had not accepted him. Many might not have accepted him. So it was an unfortunate situation and Karna had a right to feel insulted. But much of this could have been avoided if he had not presumed that he was entitled to compete. He could have asked discreetly, am I allowed to compete in this? It's not the most flattering thing to have to ask that. But it was more humiliating to come forward and be told no. Now Madhvacharya has written the Mahabharata Tatparya Nirnaya, where it's described that incidents happen slightly differently. So what happened was that he was questioned. No, he cannot fight. He cannot compete. And there's an animated discussion, and again, finally, he was allowed to compete. But because of all this furious discussion that happened to and fro, his mind became very disturbed, and he missed the target because of that. He would normally have been good enough to hit the target, but he missed the target. So, either way, whatever exactly happened, what we can say is that Karna was insulted. And again, it was unfortunate. Maybe things could have been handled better by whoever involved. But here, again, the clear point was that it was not intentional. The whole arrangement was not made to insult Karna. The purpose of the arrangement was to find a groom for Draupadi. So here we have Karna insulted. This happened earlier. And after that, soon after the Yajna, there was the gambling match. Now here I will talk about one more thing. Our overall theme was how good people do bad things. And that theme can be illustrated in various ways. So we discussed about Karna. It's the need for wanting friendship is natural. Wanting virtue is desirable. It's a difficult choice for him. He made a wrong choice. Now a small adjustment is okay. A small compromise in virtue, not good, but it's acceptable. But here he had conspired for murdering the Pandavas. That was serious. After that, when the gambling match was to be held, again something similar happened. How a good person does a bad thing. As the Rajasuya ceremony concluded, it had been overseen by Vyasadeva. And Yudhishthir came to offer Dakshina to Vyasadeva, offer his gratitude and seek blessings. And Vyasadeva, however, didn't look at all happy. Vyasadeva looked very grave. And he said, Yudhishthir said, please bless me so that I can rule virtuously and lead my kingdom to prosperity. Vyasadeva said, okay, I see dark clouds in the future. There will be soon a great war for the throne. And after that great war, then you will rule prosperously. After hearing this, Yudhishthir became grave. And he started pensively contemplating. He said, what causes war? He started analyzing. War is caused by unresolved conflicts. When two people have conflicts and they are not resolved, then that can escalate to wars. What causes unresolved conflicts is not just difference of opinion. Differences of opinion are unavoidable. But it is disobedience to authority. That means that if say two people have a conflict and both of them go to court and the court makes a decision. Now if one of the party doesn't accept the decision of the court, then what will happen is they may say, this is unfair, I'm going to attack you. So what was a court case, what was a war in court may become a war in real life. So he said disobedience to authority is what escalates to war. And therefore he decided, because he wanted to avoid this, how was he to avoid this? He made a resolution, I will always obey my elders. Now in his case, he was the authority, he was the king of the world. But he considered there are people elder to me, I'll always obey my elders. Little did he know how costly this vow will turn out to be. It was a well-intentioned vow made. But the problem was, his elders were not well intentioned. And soon Shakuni and Duryodhan prevailed on the Dhritarashtra that invite the Pandavas for a gambling match. And Dhritarashtra was not really sure whether Yudhishthira will come or not. He expected he would come, but just to make sure that Yudhishthira would find it difficult to refuse, Dhritarashtra insisted that Vidura go to invite. Vidura vehemently opposed. He said, if at this point the two cousins gamble, that will lead to disaster, that will lead to fighting. Dhritarashtra said, no, this is a game. It's not a game, it's the precursor to war. He said, no, you have to go. Now, Vidura thought that rather than Dhritarashtra sending someone else, he would go and maybe they could strategize and do something to minimize the damage. When Vidura went and brought an invitation, brought a request, the invitation but actually instruction from Dhritarashtra, Yudhishthir anyway was always deferential to his elders. And after his recent vow, it was impossible for him to refuse. And then he came. And when he arrived at the Hastinapura Sandhi, the first thing he said was, "Oh Duryodhana, why do you want to steal from me the wealth with which I aspire to serve the Brahmanas? The wealth with which I aspire to do good to human society." So Duryodhana retorted, he says, who talked anything about stealing? We're just here for a game. That was their constant refrain. It was just a game. And if you are a coward, if you are afraid, there's no need to play. Now, Yudhishthir agreed reluctantly. And then he positioned Shakuni. Now, Yudhishthir understood something terrible is going on over here. He said, this is unfair. If two people are to play, both of them should be playing, not playing through a surrogate. It's like, say, there's a match between India and Pakistan. And just before the match, it's a much hyped up match, and say India is much better than Pakistan. So Pakistan says Australian team will play on behalf. You can't do that. That is not a match between India and Pakistan. It can be a match between India and Australia. So he said, this is not fair. Yudhishthira looked at Dhritarashtra. He was the authority. Dhritarashtra remained silent. And then the gambling match began. And one thing after another, Yudhishthira started losing. And it was a rigged match, not because Shakuni cheated, but because the very basis of the match was unfair. It was Yudhishthira who had spent his whole life studying dharma so that he could rule virtuously. And Shakuni had spent his life studying adharma. He knew how to trick. He was expert at gambling and he was vicious. Yudhishthira started losing one thing after another. Now, for Yudhishthira, what had happened was, he also faced a dilemma. His dilemma was obedience to elders. That was one basis for him to decide. And the other here was protection of royal resources, his wealth and everything else. He had duty to protect that. Now in this case, he chose this. Now why did he choose this? Not because he was a uncontrolled gambler. Not at all. He chose that because he felt the very vow that he took to avoid conflict ended up causing the conflict, or ended up trapping him in conflict rather. So I once gave a class on this topic. And after the class, often I ask those who come to meet me, what did you like in the class? So there's one teenage boy, he said, what did you learn from the class? He said, obeying our elders is very dangerous. No, that is not the lesson. When we hear a class, we hear the things that we like. Although we can close our eyes, we can't close our ears. But our mind can close our ears. Things we don't like, we just forget them. So they just don't register with us. Or even if they register, we downplay them. So the point here was not that Yudhishthira was wrong in obeying his elders. What was wrong was that he made obeying his elders his highest virtue. Yes, obeying his elders is important, but there are other factors also to be considered. And he did not consider other factors. One factor here was, what is the character of the elders? What are they telling me to do? So, anyway, now of course, Yudhishthira, now here it's important to understand that when we study the epics, they could be studied at many different levels. No, at one level, we could just study the epics as transcendental. Now, transcendental means that this is just the Leela arranged by the plan of the Lord. And everything that everyone does is a part of the Leela of the Lord. And this level of analysis is at one level good for devotional relishing. So when Yudhishthira's wrong choices by this, he was prompted by the Lord from within, so that ultimately the Lord could demonstrate through the pastime of Draupadi that we have no protector except the Lord. Now that is one level of looking at the epics. Now Madhvacharya talks about various ways of looking at the epics in the Brahma Sutra Bhashya, his commentary on Vedanta Sutra, and Bhaktivinoda Thakur also talks about this in Chaitanya Chakshamrita. So let's look at this. So another level could be the ethical level. Now, yet another level could be the historical level. So historical level means, okay, this is this thing that happened in history, and it could just be, so each of these levels can have their own purpose of study. At the ethical level, when we study, then we get guidance, we learn lessons. Okay. So when we learn lessons, okay, in this situation, this action, this is the way I should act, and this is the way I should not act. So now, especially when we are dealing with exalted characters, like say Yudhishthira, and in analyzing them, now our focus is not so much on who is right, but on what is right. So here the analysis is not for disrespecting Yudhishthira. This is not so much the focus. While we can analyze that way, focus is much more on what is right. So for example, in the Bhagavad Gita, in the first chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, in the purport, Srila Prabhupada is saying about how Arjuna is so thoughtful. Even when he is about to fight a war, he is introspective, he is contemplating. And such a contemplative, thoughtful person who is responsible in decision making, such a person is indeed worthy of receiving the wisdom of the Bhagavad Gita. And as soon as the second chapter starts, Prabhupada almost goes 180 degrees. So Arjuna is crying. These tears are a sign of ignorance, they are a sign of attachment. That everybody is suffering from the skin disease. We all misidentify with the body. And the Bhagavad Gita is spoken to remove such ignorance. So now was Arjuna wise and contemplative, or was Arjuna attached and ignorant? Well, Prabhupada is focusing on helping us to learn that, yes, the first chapter does focus on how Arjuna was wise and contemplative. He was reflective. That's why he thought about it. But the second chapter shows that, yes, he was wise, but he was not wise enough for that situation. One of my friends, he recently got into one of our devotees' child actually. He got into Ivy League last year. He told when we got admission, at that time, counselor was telling us, you are among the brightest students, this and that. They were encouraging and appreciating us. And the first class that I attended, a professor was completely smashing us. Everything that you know, just forget it. This is Ivy League, you have to learn at a different degree. Forget what you have learned and learn from scratch. He said that professor made us feel as if we didn't know anything at all. So the point is, yes, you are brilliant to have gotten the Ivy League. But now you don't know anything what's taught in the Ivy League. So there is a time for glorification and there is a time for cultivation of humility. In the first chapter, Arjuna's qualifications are being emphasized. Yes, he is very much qualified to gain knowledge. But he doesn't have that knowledge. That's what's emphasized in the second chapter. So different contexts, different perspectives will be emphasized. So we can look at the transcendental perspective, and Yudhishthira was simply inspired by the Lord from within. But we can also look from the ethical perspective, and Yudhishthira's choice was a wrong choice. But it was not wrong because he was a bad person. It was wrong because of misplaced priority. The whole Mahabharata is a search for dharma. Karmano gahana karmano gati. What is the right thing to do? It's a difficult decision for Yudhishthira also. Now, later on, he tells Draupadi that I got carried away. Once he started gambling and he started losing, he kept gambling. There are times when Arjuna signaled Yudhishthira stop now. Now, it was not Yudhishthira's greed or lack of self-control that made him keep gambling. Yudhishthira was thinking, taking care of my family, taking care of my kingdom is my responsibility. I cannot keep losing everything like this. I need to win something back. As soon as I win something, I will stop. And from sheer probability, at least one time I will win. But not once did he win. So he does admit I got carried away. But the important thing is twofold. Yudhishthira, when the war, before the war finally, after the 13 years of exile, again, Dhritarashtra tried to play the same trick. Dhritarashtra said, he sent a message through Sanjay. He said, we are all part of the same family. I'm your uncle. And everybody who's a grahastha eventually has to become a vanaprastha. You are so fortunate that in youth itself you have got vanaprastha. Why do you want to become grahastha now? And why do you want to fight a war to be a grahastha? To gain a kingdom that you will eventually have to renounce. Just with my best wishes, live in the forest, live wherever you are. Now, this is, have you heard this word rationalize? What does rationalize mean?
Justify.
Conveniently.
Justify. It's a little more than justify.
According to your desire, you
Sorry?
according to your own desire, you manipulate kind of.
Yeah, it's true. It's to give a more acceptable reason for a less acceptable action. It's to give an acceptable reason for an unacceptable action. To give a noble sounding reason for a vicious action. So when we rationalize, what we do is, we tell rational lies. So this was what Dhritarashtra was doing. And at this point, 13 years in the exile had hardened Yudhishthira. There is a difference between being nice and being naive. So be nice means to be polite. Be naive means to be gullible. So Yudhishthira was nice, but he was hardened. And he was respectful but firm. He said, Sanjay, what gave you the impression that I want to fight a war? I want to wage a war. So in the presence of Dhritarashtra, the gambling match happened. In the presence of Dhritarashtra, the terms of the exile were fixed. In the presence of Dhritarashtra, Duryodhana told us that we would get our kingdom back after 13 years. All that I am saying is that what was agreed upon in Dhritarashtra's presence should be honored. We have no desire to fight. And as far as renouncing the world is concerned, he said, we still have duty to our citizens. We have duty to our ancestors. We need to beget children. We need to carry on the dynasty. And then we will in due course renounce the world. So this time he did not uncritically obey his elders. So yes, a lapse happened from him. But that lapse was due to something which he fixed. Now, why am I focusing on Yudhishthira over here? Because Arjuna was not so involved in the gambling match actively. Now let's come back to the gambling match. Both Duryodhan and Karna had felt insulted, and they saw this gambling match as an opportunity to hit back at the Kauravas, at the Pandavas. So in the gambling match, as Yudhishthira was losing one by one, some of the Kauravas were mocking Yudhishthira. Now, as it went on, he started losing everything. And then finally, he staked his brothers, then he staked himself, then he staked Draupadi. He lost every single thing. Now it was this time that Karna suggested that let us, now that Draupadi is our slave, let us have her dragged into the assembly. Now, to his credit, Karna later, while speaking to Bhishma on the 11th morning, on the 11th day's morning of the war, he regrets this action. He says, in order to please Duryodhan, I did something which I should not have done. So, Dushasan, the brute that he was, he dragged Draupadi by the hair into the assembly. He was hurled on the ground. Draupadi tried to, when you are drowning, you can hold on to grass. So Draupadi tried to somehow stop the adharma that was happening over there. And she said that if Yudhishthira had already gambled himself, then if he was not his own master, then how could he have gambled me? Now, we could say it is a technicality. But any boat is good for a drowning person. She would just stop. And then at that time, she turned and she looked at the assembly. Everybody was silent. She looked pleadingly at Bhishma. Bhishma said, "O Panchali, and even in this time of distress, that you are remembering Dharma and reminding everyone of Dharma, it is indeed laudable. Yet to answer your specific question, he said, I am confused. He said that a slave owns nothing. Yet a wife is always in the care of the husband. So now somebody thinks this is just like objectifying women. But it's not that simple. If it had been that, if it had just been objectification, treating women like property, then Yudhishthira would have gambled Draupadi while he was gambling all the property. No, he gambled everything else, he lost everything. And after he lost himself, then after that he gambled Draupadi. That means he was more valuable to him than he himself. Nonsense. So now, when Bhishma said, I cannot answer this question. And then Draupadi turned pleadingly, imploring anyone else to speak. When nobody was ready to speak. At that time, the least vicious brother among the 100 Kauravas, Vikarna, got up. And Vikarna said, there are many elders in this assembly. And Draupadi has asked us all to answer a question. Please, O elders, answer this question. And yet everyone remained silent. And then finally, Vikarna said, if nobody is ready to answer, then I will give my opinion. He said, I feel that this whole match was improper. Yudhishthir was impelled to gamble against his will. He had to gamble with Shakuni. He was egged on to gamble by manipulation. What a person does under the influence of intoxication or gambling or sexual infatuation should not be taken very seriously. Therefore, let this whole gambling match be cancelled and let everything be as it was before the gambling match. When Vikarna spoke this, everyone started applauding. This was something which Duryodhana had not expected. He was not just aghast, he was outraged. And seeing Duryodhana outraged, again, Karna's need to belong, Karna's need to please arose. And he got up and he raised his huge arms, told everyone, silence, silence, silence. And he said, I have seen many improper things in this gambling match, in this assembly today. But nothing is as improper as this speech by Vikarna. He is but a child and yet he speaks as if he is the wisest in this assembly. He says, nobody forced Yudhishthira to gamble. He gambled by his own will. Yudhishthira knew Shakuni's skills and yet he chose to gamble. And as far as Draupadi being brought in over here, he said, she was one fair and square by Yudhishthira. Vikarna had said, if an honorable lady is treated like this, we will all be condemned. So this was the lowest blow that Karna had, he said. As far as Draupadi is concerned, now what kind of honorable lady has 5 husbands? The one who has 5 husbands can also have 6, can also have 100. And if eyes could burn, Bhima would have burned Karna at this point. But this was the worst thing. Now, here, first of all, it was not Draupadi had gone and sought 5 husbands. It was Arjuna who had won, but because of circumstances, she had got 5 husbands. And it was that Vyasadeva had sanctioned that. Even her father had reservations. But Vyasadeva had sanctioned that, and Vyasadeva had told a story from a previous life. So there was no question of her lacking in virtue because she had 5 husbands. And yet when Karna said that this was because in the gambling match, in that whole series of events, actually the person who comes out brightest is Draupadi. Although she is dishonored, she reminds everyone of virtue. And yes, it is Krishna's dramatic help that saved her at the last moment. But still, nobody saw Krishna coming over there. All that they saw was that her cloth just became inexhaustible. And they thought this is a miracle that has happened because of her virtue. So she comes out the brightest. And the person who comes out the darkest from this gambling match is Karna. He incited this, and when it could have been stopped, he prevented that from stopping. Now, why would he do something like that? Because he wanted to please Duryodhana. Now, just as Yudhishthir made one mistake, that is, he made obeying his elders as his highest virtue. There are virtues in life. We all want to act virtuously, act rightly. But sometimes in life, we don't just need virtues. we need a hierarchy of virtues. Okay, which virtue is how important? And we could say I could say that Karna, it was understandable that Karna felt indebted to Duryodhana. It was understandable Karna wanted to please Duryodhana. But the question is that in trying to please others, in trying to go closer to others, sometimes we go away from ourselves. And that can be one of the greatest losses. See, we want friendship, we want relationships, but not at the cost of losing our soul. Now here I'm using the word soul metaphorically. We never lose our soul, but the very essence of our character. So when we let any relationship, here in this case friendship, becomes so important that all other values are subordinated, then that can be a recipe for disaster. So in trying to go closer to Duryodhana, Karna actually went away from himself. So what could he have done to prevent this? Tomorrow I'll talk about 3 different kinds of misdeeds and how when somebody does something wrong in their life, how do we evaluate? Is that person really bad? When does bad action make a person bad? Do bad actions make people bad? It's a difficult question. Sometimes we say, it's just occasionally, it's once in a while it happened. It's just a slip. Yeah, it's possible. Now, with respect to Karna, yes, this was a terrible incident. A terrible action that he did. But even this did not seal his fate. This was, in many ways, it could have been considered unforgivable, what he did. And yet after this, Krishna gave him another chance. Krishna, just before the war started, Krishna invited Karna over. So why he said no and what happened over there, that we'll discuss in tomorrow's session. But I'll make 2 quick points about this point which I said, that in going close to others, what I say, don't go far away from yourself. Don't go far away from yourself. So how do we prevent this from happening? The first thing is, know our boundaries. Know our boundaries. See, we all, at one level, every person is defined by 2 things. There are bonds and there are boundaries. Bonds means that whom do I have a relationship with? As you say, a person is known by the friendship that they give, the kind of people they associate with. So our bonds are important for us. Whom are we bonded with? But when we have bonds, along with the bonds, there have to be boundaries. Okay, I love you, I care for you, I want to help you. No, suppose a friend comes and says, no, I'm in great need for money. Okay, I don't have much. Say my child is in danger, I need some surgery to be done. Okay, I don't have much, but I can help you. He says, no, I don't want your money. I want you to help me rob a bank. Oh. He'll say, no, I cannot do that. He says, you call me your friend? Why can't you help me when I need it? He says, so the answer here is, basically friendship is being used to emotionally blackmail a person. He says, the right question to ask is not, how can a friend not do something like this? The question should be, how can someone who calls themselves a friend ask another friend to do something like this? The questions, sometimes questions can be used to enlighten, But questions can also be used to obfuscate, to confuse, to manipulate. So a friend will not ask a friend to do something like this. So we all need to have boundaries. Bonds and boundaries. If one bond becomes so big, so strong, so overwhelming, that for the sake of that bond, we start neglecting all boundaries, then that is not good. That can lead to the loss of our own character. So, a person is known not just by their bonds but by their boundaries. Not only the strength of a bond is known by what we are ready to do for that person, but the strength of our boundaries is known by what we will not do. What we will not do. Now, Karna, for the sake of a bond, gave up all boundaries. And that was a big mistake on his part. So, as I said, we have to know our boundaries. Now we can say, somebody has a very regulated life. Say in the morning, every day I wake up, I do my sadhana, and then I do other things. But suppose there is an emergency, somebody is in some friend's house, some relative's house. Say, okay, I cannot help you till I complete my sadhana. No, that's a boundary that's negotiable if it's required. So some boundaries can be negotiable, but there are some boundaries that need to be non-negotiable. And especially, we all have a sense of right and wrong. There are some people who just repeatedly neglect their conscience, that their conscience becomes like muted. They don't have that sense of right and wrong. And Duryodhan was like that. Now, he had no sense of right and wrong. Although there's one verse that is attributed to him, that Janami adharmam dharmam nache me pravrittim, Janami adharmam nache me nivrittim. But directly, that might have been his case when he was a little younger. That means he says, I know what is right, but I don't feel like doing it. I know what is wrong, but I don't feel like doing it. That might have been his state earlier. But after the gambling match, after the exile, what happened for him after the Kauravas were exiled and the Pandavas were exiled and they came back? When Krishna came as peace messenger and everybody was trying to tell him that just settle for peace with the Pandavas. So he said, why are you all blaming me? He said, I am simply acting according to my nature. And my nature has been given to me by my Creator. So if at all anyone is to be blamed, the Creator should be blamed, not me. Again, this is rational lies. Now, Karna was not like that. Karna had a conscience, but he neglected his conscience. He neglected repeatedly. It all began from the time when Karna agreed to go along. So, we could say, know your boundaries. Second point is don't neglect your conscience. So once we start neglecting our conscience, conscience is the inner voice, viveka buddhi, which tells us this is right, this is wrong. So we can see at the time of the forest fire, the house of lac, there all that was Karna's consent. He just went along with it. But in the gambling match, it was not just Karna consenting, it was Karna instigating. So he degenerated. Once he neglected the voice of conscience, then the neglect started going further and further and further down. So sometimes when somebody does something brutal, you're like, how could you have done something like that? What kind of human being will do like that? Well, what happens is, when ordinary people keep staying silent when something wrong is going on, then over a period of time, they not only stay silent, they start doing more and more wrong things. So, this does not necessarily mean that we have to fight against every wrong in the world. We don't have the resources to do that. But things where we have a stake, things where we have a responsibility, things where we have a voice. Now, if we are choosing to stay silent, then it should be a strategic decision. Okay, right now I don't have the power to do this. My saying no is only going to weaken my position. In future, I will stop this. So that is a strategic silence that is different. But there is a strategic silence and then there is a passive silence where one actually just lets things happen, and once it lets things start becoming worse and worse and worse and worse. And not that things start becoming worse and worse, but we start becoming worse and worse with it. So that's what unfortunately happened to Karna. So if we know our boundaries and we listen to our conscience, then even if situations come, then it won't be that we will do unacceptably bad things. We will be able to protect ourselves. So I'll summarize what we discussed today. And mainly we discussed about the theme of Gahana Karmano Gati, that karma, what is the right thing to do is difficult to understand. But that difficulty arises from different things. So I'll not summarize sequentially, I'll just summarize thematically more. And we discussed of levels of studying epics. And we discussed two main levels. Which were the two main levels? Transcendental and ethical. That's what we focused on. So which one did we discuss today primarily? Which level we are discussing at? Ethical level. Ethical level, we focus not so much on who is good and who is bad, but what is good and what is bad. Our purpose is not so much to judge the characters as to learn good characteristics for ourselves, learn virtue for ourselves. So from that perspective, we started by discussing about Yudhishthir's wrong choice. Yudhishthir's, you could say, error of judgment. That he focused on making obedience to elders. Wow. Is this an indication that the class time is over? Okay, his error of judgment that he made obeying his elders as a topmost virtue. But the key thing was that he corrected it later. It's still that error of judgment had serious consequences, but he corrected it. And the third thing we discussed was that now Karna's, in one sense, degeneration. So what happened was in the gambling, now both he and Duryodhan had reason to be insulted. But we discussed how Hare Krishna. That although it was unfortunate that they were disrespected, but it was not intentionally planned. Whereas Draupadi's insult was intentionally planned. And in this case, it could have been stopped. Karna instigated it, and Karna ensured that it went on when Vikarna tried to put a stop. So what happened for Karna was that his bond was strong, so strong that his boundaries went down completely. So we need to have bonds and boundaries both. And how to ensure that that something like this doesn't happen to us is that we have our boundaries and then we listen to conscience. So boundaries is more like we intellectually know that these are my boundaries, and then conscience is when we are making some decisions. At that time, a voice from inside speaks to us. So define boundaries and then listen to conscience. So in tomorrow's session, the Sunday feast, we'll discuss about how Karna made the choice that turned fatal for him. So, any questions or comments? Yes.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, very nice description of that pastime. My question to you is, even at an ethical level, when we learn epics and we're trying to get lessons, all what you discussed in today's class, could we juxtapose Yudhishthira instead of Karna and say what makes a good virtuous person do a bad thing as a lapse in judgment? So typically as a king, people are expected to have diplomacy, introspect, someone who's had a pattern of threatening your life and your family member's life. What makes someone repose their faith in someone like that? And that one decision, excessive fidelity to that one decision, made him, a king is supposed to protect all fellow citizens, but he couldn't even protect his own wife. So thus excessive fidelity to one misreposed faith make you go astray, and even from your basic dharma, which is protection of life.
Yes, that's what happened to Yudhishthira, unfortunately. So his obedience to his in this case to Dhritarashtra, it was the cause of his undoing. Now, in one sense, his obedience was also well-intentioned. He wanted to obey because he thought by obedience conflicts will be avoided. And he said if conflicts can be avoided, then that is how the peace and harmony in the kingdoms can be maintained. So it was not that he was reckless. It was not that he was addicted. It was that Karna Karma. It was that in that particular situation, he thought that what he thought was the right thing was not the right thing. So in general, what is right and what is wrong? How do we decide that? One is by the content of the action. What exactly is being done? But now we could say gambling itself we might consider as objectionable. But in those times, for Kshatriyas, gambling was an accepted sport. So in that sense, it was not a completely unacceptable action. Content was okay. He was reluctant, as we said. Now we can look at his intent. And then we can look at the consequence. So there are different branches of ethics and even contemporary ethical theory. Different branches of ethics focus on different things. But the point is that sometimes we learn from experience. And then if in a similar situation, if the same decision if we had to make the same decision, we'd probably have made the decision differently. So was it like was it an uncritical trust in Dhritarashtra? Well, see, yes and no. Yes and no in the sense that Dhritarashtra had till then at least tried to wear a mask of neutrality. Dhritarashtra had given the Pandavas half of the kingdom. Even though it was a barren half of the kingdom, at least he had given that. So it was very clear that Duryodhana was antagonistic. Now, how antagonistic was Dhritarashtra? Dhritarashtra was certainly not favorable to Yudhishthira. But would did Yudhishthira have an idea that Dhritarashtra would let things go so far? Where he would let a gambling match lead to the dishonoring of what was basically his own daughter-in-law in one sense. The word is word that was shocking in any sense of the word. That, okay, she might not be your daughter, son's wife, but they're a part of the same family. And within that, something like that Yudhishthira, that Dhritarashtra would allow things to go so far. Yudhishthira had no idea about that. Once he understood that, even after that, after the war over, Yudhishthira offered respect to Dhritarashtra's elder. But there can be respect, but no trust. So here he had some trust. It was misguided, but then he had, now we know the full story, we have the reference point for that. Okay, some elders can be a little weak in standing up for the right position. But can they be actually outright supporters of a bad position? Dhritarashtra had not done that till then. Dhritarashtra had acted at least as if he was in great lamentation after the Pandavas were killed. And when they came back, he welcomed them and he said that it's fortunate that you have survived a terrible fire. Now, did he know about it? Well, probably he knew something was going to happen. Was he happy that it had happened? Well, it does seem from that whole character that it was not that he wanted the Pandavas to die, but he did want his son to become the king. So he definitely didn't actually stop it. But sometimes that the Dhritarashtra had no boundaries, Yudhishthira did not know that before. Does that answer your question? Yes.
When we compare the lives of these two archers, Karna and Arjuna, Karna had a friendship with Krishna, and Karna had a friendship with Duryodhana, and Arjuna had the friendship with Krishna. Now, when we look at it, we know that one friendship was better than the other. Karna had to make a decision between his virtue and friendship. Virtue basically means what's the wise decision. And he chose his friendship. But Arjun did the same thing. He had to choose between an army. Like during the war, he had to choose between an army and Krishna. He chose the friendship with Krishna and not the army, which was the wise thing to do, to protect his kingdom and actually win the war. How do we know that our friendship is good or bad? Like now we look at it, we know he did the right thing. But when we are making the decision, how do we know that when we choose this friendship, it would be better for us? Or should we be wiser and choose the army?
Okay, good question. So, when Arjuna chose Krishna instead of the army, that was not exactly the wise decision. And how does that compare with Karna choosing Duryodhana instead of virtue? Well, first of all, there's a slight difference between virtue and wisdom. Sometimes the virtuous thing may not be the wise thing to do. Strategically, standing up for virtue can get us into trouble. And sometimes we say the wise thing, the prudent thing, just stay silent, otherwise you will also be knocked down. That can happen. But apart from that difference, I would say Arjuna's choosing Krishna had both a devotional reason and a practical reason. The devotional reason was that he knew Krishna was God and he wanted Krishna to be by his side. Arjuna never had to have even a second thought about that. But even from a practical perspective, Arjuna wanted that if he had to win, he needed an expert charioteer. Karna had already got Shalya. I don't know if Karna had Shalya or Shalya came afterwards. But anyway, Arjuna needed a good charioteer. And Arjuna and Krishna had already worked well before. Right from the beginning when they had fought a Khandaprastha against a whole assembly galaxy of Devatas. So even from a practical perspective, it was not a foolish decision. At first glance, it might seem to be counterintuitive, but it was a wise decision. And the key point is that it's not just choosing friendship. It is choosing. You see, sometimes we can be a friend by refusing to do what the friend tells us to. What friend wants us to do. Now, if a friend is like I give the example, a friend wants to rob the bank, and the friend wants us to assist. We can be a good friend by refusing to assist, isn't it? So when he chose friendship, actually we can say more precisely that when Duryodhana chose, he chose almost like a blind adherence to friendship. And that's not in one sense. Was he a good friend? Well, if he had been a good friend, rather than doing a bad thing with a friend, he would have stopped the friend from doing the bad thing. So it's a very different situation. And Arjuna, so I would say that rather than simply thinking of it as a choice between virtue and friendship, it is more a choice of action that we are going to do. So sometimes I may refuse to do what a friend tells me to do, but I could still be choosing that friendship by refusing that. Now the friend may not think like that at that time. So if somebody wants to go to a party where drugs are there, and then I say, I'm not going. He says, you are a friend, why you want me to go alone over there? I look like a sore loser over there. Well, if you go there, you will be a sore loser. I won't come with you. Okay. So there, maybe that time they will not appreciate. But later on they will appreciate. So being a friend doesn't necessarily mean doing always what the friend wants us to do. So sometimes by choosing virtue, we may actually be choosing friendship. Real authentic friendship. Okay? Thank you. Yes, please.
So you talked about setting boundaries for ourselves, using our conscience as guide. Um, does the flip side also apply? Like, do you need to set boundaries to your friends so that they don't step on your toes? Is there a necessity to do that for friendship?
Yes, I'm not sure the two are different. For ourselves, boundaries means that for our friends also, we need to set some boundaries. That means, say, I have a friend who is also an author, and he says that when he is writing, he puts a notice on outside his room. He says, I'm humbly telling you, if you disturb me while I write, I'll break your legs. Now he's a writer. He's a professional writer. That's his job. Writers don't usually have an office. I mean, they don't go to office to work. They write at their own place. So he said, I had to set those boundaries. Without that, it won't work. So yes, in friendship, also in normal friendship, also some boundaries are required. Yes, definitely. Even in devotional friendships, even bhakti boundaries are required. So sometimes in bhakti we might prioritize one thing so much that we may neglect other things which may also be important. Like in the early days of the movement, what happened was devotees said pleasing the spiritual master is the most important thing. And to please the spiritual master, we please the representative of the spiritual master. And the representatives were the temple authorities. So now nobody was ill-intentioned, but what happened is 1970s roughly, there's a lot of distribution fever in our movement. So it's nice to distribute a lot of books and give people opportunities for gain spiritual wisdom. But that time, the temple leaders in several temples told that everyone should go out for book distribution. And there are young mothers with very small children. And they were told, you keep your babies with someone, with one person who will take care of all the babies, and you go out and distribute books. And then they thought, oh, this is what will please Srila Prabhupada. But one of the young mothers, she wrote to Prabhupada. And Prabhupada said, why? I'm surprised that you're leaving your baby and going somewhere else to distribute. You take care of your baby. Taking care of your children is like taking care of your deities. So Prabhupada emphasized that. So now, pleasing the spiritual master, sharing Krishna, that is important. It's wonderful. But there are different services. We all have different dharmas. And which dharma will be more important at what time? That has to be carefully understood. So uncritical or unquestioning, like, not just prioritization or elevation of one particular instruction at the cost of everything else. That doesn't work. Okay. Any other questions? Yes, please.
Tricky question though. So, at Dukan, who was the king?
At
Dukan, who was the king? At a time when Krishna asked for 5 villages, who was the king? So, who was the responsible person for serving with justice?
Okay.
Right?
Okay,
And
good question.
That's why the act of Duryodhana is more of a childish act. Though he was not child, the act was childish, right? And the person who was responsible to serve justice was different person. So why we are blaming Duryodhana for everything? Plus, why in Mahabharata his father was never punished? He was never punished, right?
Okay, good question. So who was in charge when the gambling match happened? Who was in charge when eventually Krishna's peace proposal came? Yes, Dhritarashtra was officially on the throne. Mhm. Now, it was Dhritarashtra's decision to make. He did make a call, but it was too late. He took a stand. So definitely he is culpable. Then if you consider later on when the peace, Krishna came with the peace proposal. At that time, Krishna was initially speaking with Dhritarashtra. And Dhritarashtra said, right in the beginning only, after a few minutes of Krishna's speech, Dhritarashtra said, okay Shiva, all that you say is perfect, is completely acceptable to me. It is just my son that does not listen. Please persuade him. At that time, Krishna turned to Duryodhana. After he started addressing Duryodhana. And Krishna told, oh Kuru elders, note that the king of the world, the king of the Kuru dynasty has admitted his powerlessness before Duryodhana. So, was there abdication of responsibility on the part of Dhritarashtra? Definitely. Now, was Duryodhana's act childish? Well, it depends on how you define it. As first of all, he was not physically a child. Now nowadays we have these rules that if a minor commits a crime, then the minor is not treated the same, is not penalized the same way as an adult. But if a minor takes a gun and shoots people ruthlessly, well, the actions have consequences. If a minor violates a woman, well, if that person can do that activity, then person deserves to be held responsible for that activity. So Duryodhana was by no means a minor, first of all. So he manipulated Dhritarashtra. It was Dhritarashtra's mistake that he got manipulated, no doubt. But at the same time, Dhritarashtra never had the mentality of a king, the sense of responsibility that comes with a king. The kingdom just fell on his lap circumstantially. From his childhood, he had that sense of indignation or resentment that I not become the king because he was born blind. But he never trained to be a king the way Pandu became. Pandu was trained. So was he culpable? Yes, but he was manipulated. And now, as far as he getting consequences, for different people, you have different severity of consequences. In general, this is an elaborate subject in the Mahabharata and in Dharma Shastras. See, what is the purpose of punishment? Punishment broadly has three purposes. Punishment is to stop the wrongdoer at the first level. When you have done something wrong, you should not do it again. Second is deter others from doing wrong. That's why it said justice should not just be done, justice should be seen to be done. If one person has robbed, at least we don't want them to rob again. And second is that we want everybody to know if you rob, these are the consequences. Therefore, don't do this. Deter others from it. And make amends to the victim. Make amends to the victim. There are three broad purposes. So now, among these three purposes, Duryodhana was incorrigible. The only way to stop him was by killing him. Now, as far as Dhritarashtra was concerned, he was already a weak person. It was not that he had come up with schemes. So now that his sons were killed, he had lost what he lived for. He was already in pain. There was no need to give him any further pain. It was not that he had done wrong because he wanted to. He had gone along with somebody else who was the wrongdoer. That person remained to do. So in one sense, the death of Duryodhana itself stopped Dhritarashtra's further wrongdoing. Then Dhritarashtra was never seen as an example by anyone. So it was not going to deter others from wrongdoing. And the last was make amends. Well, there was no amends that they could be made for the Pandavas. Dhritarashtra had nothing. The Pandavas, they had lost 13 years of their life. Well, that was over. Basically, at the end of the war, the Pandavas just wanted to put an end, put the war behind it. it was not exactly a glorious victory. The victory was what is often called as a Pyrrhic victory. Pyrrhic victory means often the victory cost so much, and at the end you start thinking, was this really worth it? The Pandavas lost all their sons in the war. It was extremely painful for them. So they just didn't want to escalate any further. Just put a stop to it.
I have one more question. What about Devadra? What about the Vishnu? Devadra. And he was also in the same audience. And he was one of the guys who was responsible for overall act of Hastinapur. Now, after knowing his ignorance, or I would say not coming to judgment, right judgment and all that, why Krishna gave him the vision, or I would say the Virat Swarup darshan to him, which he was not actually eligible for after doing all these things.
Okay. How much time do we have?
Inside 46. 46 we have.
Okay, okay. So now regarding Bhishma, again, it's a little complicated. But you can look at Bhishma's actions at the ethical level. You can look at his actions at the transcendental level. So now, at the ethical level, among everybody in the Kurukshetra war, Bhishma suffered the most painful end. He had to lie on a bed of arrows. Like we often use the word bed of arrows. But actually a bed of arrows is everything opposite to what a bed is meant to be. On our bed, even if there's a small mound, we move around, try to hold it. If there's a nail in our bed, we can't sleep. If our bed is made of nails, who can sleep? And arrows are sharper than nails. So, he at an ethical level, his silence, his consent to Duryodhana's actions, especially silence during his refusal to take a stand in the Draupadi Swanara situation, that had consequences. So there is the perspective of dharma and there is the perspective of bhakti. So ethical is a dharmic perspective. From dharmic perspective, he did make a mistake, and there were consequences for that. Now, having said that, Krishna embodies balance. Krishna did not overlook Bhishma's dharmic mistake because of his bhakti, but Krishna did not overlook his bhakti because of his dharmic mistake. Both were there. So, what happened was that Bhishma in his heart was devoted. Bhishma is a complex character and he's noble and virtuous, but he operates with a very fixed understanding of what is virtue. This is right, this is wrong, and that's all. There's no more discussion. So that kind of very rigid understanding of right and wrong is called as niyamagraha. Niyamagraha is sticking to the letter of the law at the cost of the spirit of the law. So he embodies that. But at the same time, it's important to understand that a person's ethical judgment can go wrong even when the person's heart is in the right place. So because ethical judgment is still a matter of intelligence. The heart is deeper. He never desired harm for the Pandavas. He never desired harm for Draupadi. And that is why it was eventually he told the Pandavas how they could kill him. So at a bhakti level, he had bhakti in his heart. And Krishna wanted him to be on the side of adharma to show the world that adharma will not win. No matter how great a supporter it might have. There's no warrior like Bhishma in the entire world. And Bhishma was not just a great Kshatriya, Bhishma was also very learned. He had learned from the sages in heaven as child. And yet a person with so much Kshatriya valor and a person with so much learning, if that person goes against dharma, even that person will fall eventually. So that lesson Krishna taught through Bhishma. So now his heart was in the right place even if his judgment was wrong. So Krishna, so because his judgment was wrong, there were consequences. Consequences of society and consequences for him also. But because his heart was in the right place, Krishna saw that also. And just because a person has made a wrong judgment, even if it be a catastrophic judgment with catastrophic consequences, that does not mean that that person is a terrible person. So that's why Krishna eventually came with Yudhishthira before Bhishma when he was in his final moments and sought instruction from him. And then finally Krishna helped Bhishma in the final transition. So in some ways the material and the spiritual need to be separated. That at a material level, actions will have material consequences. And those have to be acknowledged. At a spiritual level, the same action may have a positive spiritual consequence, and at a material level it may have a negative consequence. So we need to separate the two. Just like suppose somebody has diabetes and then they come to us at some program like this and they say that, okay, what is the dessert today? Is there a dessert? Gulab Jamun. Okay. There's a Gulab Jamun. Oh, this is Mahaprasad. How can I dishonor it? I honor it. Okay. The Mahaprasad will purify you at a spiritual level. But at a material level, it is going to have consequences. The sugar level will shoot up, the diabetes may act out again. So, we have to consider actions from both a material and spiritual perspective. So yes, you want to purify yourself, wonderful. But then if you have diabetes, there's other prasad level. You don't have to eat that. So now it is true that prasadam will purify. But in the intermediate, there are consequences. So for Bhishma, his devotion to Krishna was strong. And therefore, in the final moment, he was redeemed. But in the intermediate, there are consequences for the world and even for him. Okay? So thank you very much for your thoughtful participation.
Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki Jai, Srila Prabhupada ki Jai, Gaur Bhaktivinoda ki Jai, Gaur Premanand.
ISKCON Chaitanya Charan Prabhu ki. Right. So, thank you very much, Prabhu. Very wonderful, thought-provoking, practical, yet you captured all the audience. Thank you very much. And then third part and final part will be tomorrow. Please don't miss it.